So another kind of, there's some pretty interesting things you can do. Even at this point, I can use this live function here. If I hit this snapping tool here to make the surface live. So I select my surface and then I click this little magnet and it says the surface is live. And now what I can do is I can actually draw curves on the surface and hit enter. And now I have this like new kind of pivot and it just has two coordinates here. So I'm able to kind of slide my curve along the surface in these two directions. So this curve um, is tied two-dimensionally to this surface. If I go up to curves and say open close, I can close this curve. And if I right click on this curve, I can manipulate its shape as I would any other curve. And now what I can do is I can, with this curve selected, so go to object mode here, because this is not yet an object, you know, it's a curve that I've drawn on this surface, but it hasn't populated here in the outliner as its own object. So if I have to go to curves and say duplicate surface curves. And so now I have this curve is an object on my surface. And so there's a couple things I can do. I'm just not really sure what this is, but I'm going to just kind of neglect that glitch. I'm not really sure. Okay, so now what I can do is something kind of neat is um, if I go to my surfaces here, and this curve is now a separate object. I can kind of move it away from my let me go ahead and I think it's because I'm still on this live mode, so I make live disabled. And I still have this curve here, object mode. So my curve is still there. Let me go back and pull this back. It must be tied to the original curve. What I can do now is I want to turn off make live and go to my surfaces here and go to the trim tool. And so it says pick the surface to trim. And so now it wants me to either select the which surface I want to keep. So I have this curve that's you know, placed on top of my surface. And so if I click inside that curve or outside of it, it's going to decide what it's going to keep. I hit return, and now it's cut a hole in this surface. Okay, I can do the other way. I can go up to surfaces, say trim tool, and select the inside and hit return. And now it's just keeping that part of the shape. Okay, and now I still have all of what's left here. And whenever you see something highlighted in pink, it means that this is influenced by that it's tied to it. That this curve is influencing this surface. So again, if I still go into my control vertices here, I still should be able to manipulate this surface, even though I've done a number of applications to it, used different tools on it. I'm still able, just using my curves, to change the shape of this surface object. There are a couple other things that we can do. I'm going to just create a NURBS. I'm going to delete everything here so far and just create a NURBS cylinder. And what I can do is frame this up by hitting F. Is I can go to my isoparm component here. And what that'll do is that will I'm able to drop in this kind of dotted yellow line of where maybe I want an isoparm to be. And an isoparm, here we don't see any, but it's kind of like what you would consider an edge in polygon mode. But what I can do with this isoparm here, if I go to surfaces, is I can like detach along that isoparm. And so now I have two, I've cut this, this cylinder in half. So I have these two halves now. I can, use these two and say attach. And it will bridge those two together. And it creates a third object here. And this is actually something just like in polymodeling. One surface has lighting and texture that can be applied and the other does not. You can change this, I think, under lighting by saying two-sided lighting, which is useful. Also, you can change the direction by going to surfaces, reverse direction, to change the direction that the one-sided lighting is applied to. Okay, so I just went ahead and did that. What else do I want to tell you about working with curves and surfaces? The last thing that I want to talk about is creating a polygon mesh from a NURB surface. And NURB surfaces will render in Maya, but because there are more complicated kind of equations that are involved in computing the where the it's hard to kind of describe it, but if you have something that is made up of facets, those points are where the object, how the object's geometry is described. With surfaces, we have it's similar, it's basically the curves, but it's like one step removed. The curves are generated based on where these control vertices are. So there's like an extra computational element to creating this, to rendering out this surface. And so if you have any type of material that has any kind of reflectivity to it, or like a metalness or something that reflects the scene, it takes a whole lot longer to compute where those reflections are using surfaces. So while it's really great to be able to have NURBs and curves to generate forms from, you really do want to then you want to convert your NURB surfaces to polygons in order to cut down on the tremendous rendering time. It's not standard practice for animators or modelers to use curves and then have that be the final output. So in order to be able to generate a poly model from your curves, you go to modify and you go down to convert and you say NURBs to polygons. And so if I click this option box here, I'm able to convert them into quads or triangles. I would recommend triangles because, and like I said, I think in the first set of videos, you want to have either 3 or 4-sided faces that make up your polygon mesh. So if I go to triangles here, and there's a number of different ratios and different parameters here, but I'm just going to go with the default for the rest. If I go ahead and hit apply, no valid item selected. Oh, because I'm in hull. Okay, so make sure that my sphere is selected, the object, in object mode, and go to apply. And now I've generated a polygon sphere in tris from my NURB sphere. And so again, you can see that now this is made out of flat lines and flat faces. So whenever you're done modeling in curves or with NURB objects or surfaces, um, you want to, it's funny that they're somehow tied together when I move this, even though they're not grouped. I'm going to go ahead and delete that sphere just so I have my poly object, okay? And I might want to go and say modify center pivot. So you will want to convert your NURB surface to a polygon once you're done modeling it. But modeling in, modeling a form that has curves, and I think a kind of generic application of this would be like modeling a car. There's a lot of curves on a car. The wheels are all curves that you would use NURBs and curves in order to create those forms. And then once you're done, you would convert those to a polygon. So I think that's it for, there's a lot more things you can do with surfaces. So, feel free to explore and experiment some of these other tools and functions here. But that should give you some really kind of a general overview of using modeling NURBs and modeling with curves. And in the next couple videos, we're going to get into doing more complicated polygon modeling.